all set?
Keep going.
Okay.
I'll get it eventually.
Just open up a Word document, right? Okay, it is Wednesday, July 9th. This is the second meeting of the North Smithfield Charter Review Committee. First item on the agenda is roll call. I'm blanking on everybody's names already. Mr. Burnett.
Yes.
Here, okay. Mrs. Newberry.
Here.
Mrs. Cristoforo.
Here.
Mr. Newton.
Here.
And the chair is here. Second item on the agenda is public comment. Have anything? Okay. You know the drill. Name, address, and
Hamilton, 437 Black Lane Road. I just want to thank you for taking on this task. It's never an easy one, and the idea of reading the charter from start to finish is probably not ever going to happen. So I just ask you to thoughtfully give some credence to some of the major things that we may have in the past looked at. Maybe they didn't get to a ballot. We could spend all day looking at gender neutral types of things and, just spelling errors and things of that nature, right? But that's not really what we need, and it's such a daunting task, so I really appreciate you taking time to do this. I know some of the issues that we had talked about in the past were going from an elected position to an appointed town manager. I don't know if that's something we want to look at again, but, resurrecting some of the things that we may have looked at, and then also looking at things that either have been glaringly bothering you, and you want to address them, or that you've heard from any constituents as to the direction they would like to see going. So I want to thank you again. That's it. I really don't have anything more dramatic than that, but I appreciate your time.
oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Anybody else for public comment? Going once. No, I'm just kidding. Item number 3 for discussion, consideration, and action, we're going to table. It's the meeting minutes from our previous meeting, June 18th. So then that way we can distribute those accordingly and review those. So we'll get that on for the next meeting. And then really the bulk of our agenda this evening is for discussion, consideration, and action, the town charter and areas of review. I know I have sent along to this committee lots of different documents from the town clerk and from the town solicitor. There's a lot of reading to work on, a lot to parse out. So really, I think what would probably be best is kind of sectioning off areas that we can focus on as I put further down in the agenda, a review of chapters 1 through, or sections 1 through 5. We can certainly kind of meld those two together based on what has been distributed. If there are comments, thoughts, I am certainly open to just leaving everything open for discussion right now based on the items that I had sent along previously. And in communications with the town solicitor, he had also said he is available for us to be emailing him questions and get guidance from him in that manner. And additionally, he had also made recommendation to the town council going through the budget process of bringing on, it's not Code Red, that's another code company. Is it E-Codes? General Codes. So that they can start their process of analyzing the charter and bringing it up to snuff with general state law. And those were some of his comments to date so far, but I have a feeling probably this meeting will have more questions than answers. I know I had gone through the first 5 sections, and there's a lot of legalese in there that is not straightforward language and can sometimes be hard to understand. So certainly, let's lean on the solicitor as our resource as we continue to move forward. But with that, in saying that, I'll just leave everything open for discussion for the that first round of documents that we had gotten. And with for the public's knowledge, we also received the documents that we did receive from the town solicitor was, pulling them up right now, I'm sorry. Majority were the ballots from the last Charter Review Commission back in 2018. So there were a series of questions and language that had been proposed and put forward. I believe some of them, it wasn't marked which ones passed and which ones failed, but I know that the town manager one did fail, but I think a lot of the other ones did get approved. Because as you probably saw in the PDF that I shared of just the charter itself, we saw a lot of those updates noted and dated. So I will leave this topic open if there are things that something that stood out to people, things that we want to make sure we highlight and make sure we're reviewing. Don't jump all at once.
I'll start.
Okay.
One of the things that I noticed was that in the past, one of the discussion points had been updating forms of communication and taking out outdated wording such as faxing and that type of thing. There's no mention of putting things on the website. And I don't know if that's something that really needs a charter update or just sort of like a way of doing things where we are making sure that maybe the town council wants to do something about, but it just seems like that should be something that is going on the website and not just going out to the newspaper, and that kind of needs some updating. Mm-hmm. Another thing that has always it's been interesting to me, and I've always been curious about it, is just on the very first page, page 6, the section 5. I would love sort of to make sure that this is really compliant. It talks about the conflict between town ordinance and resolution and any law of the state. Obviously, we are a home rule charter, which means that we don't need to run things by the General Assembly. But it makes it seem as though if the town passes an ordinance, it should supersede state laws. And just the wording of it is clunky. And so I want to make sure that that really makes a lot of sense and is clean. So those are two of the kind of things that I found while going through these first 5 sections.
I would definitely agree with that. I think in reading through those first 5 sections, that was probably the component that I was most fixated on, because the language is a little bit clunky and it's not super, it's just not very concise. And again, it's legalese, so it's kind of understanding some of that terminology. But I think especially from a constituent perspective, like we have constituents reading this, and we want to just make it very clear how our charter works, especially in relation to state law, home, and then, yeah, the home rule component too.
Yeah, I agree.
Looked like the prior.
Sorry, how's that? It looked like the prior, because I looked at the YouTube videos that they had, and the track changes document of everything that the prior review committee had suggested. It looked like they had suggested that sort of change to make things more parsimonious, and I guess that didn't make it to it wasn't one of the 9 questions that made it to the ballot ultimately. So I don't know where that dropped out or why. Might be useful to find out.
Yeah, from my understanding, I also talked with Tony Gerton, who was the previous chairman of the commission, and he was saying that there was so much that they wanted to update and revise, just to bring it up to understandable language, that we would have had 60 plus, upwards of like 50 or 60 questions for each section of the charter. And while that's great, you get voter fatigue as you're going, you know, I get voter fatigue when I get to the bottom of school committee when we're voting for everything. So on top of all the, you know, state bonds and everything and the language that we have to go through, you know, there would have been a massive undertaking for that education to make sure everyone understands why they're making those changes and all that. So that was that was kind of the word, was that there was just so much that they cherry picked their top priorities to, so we can certainly pick up where they left off and understand, get a better understanding of, you know, maybe what we can revisit some of those priorities again.
Perhaps that when we get to the section where we talk about the Charter Review Commission in the charter, maybe one of the things that needs to happen is that these need to happen more frequently and just be constantly rolling, so that there's not a gap, and a lot of those cleanups can be made in a much more, there can be a list of priorities and cleanups can be made sort of as a little bit at a time, more frequently.
Yeah, especially to keep up with state regulations. I know that was a concern of the solicitor. Hello?
There you go. No,
It was on? Oh, okay. I didn't realize it was on.
Nope.
Yeah, so that was one of the concerns of the solicitor, and I agree. It should be we either need to have a rolling charter review commission or put somebody responsible in the town to at least update for state regulations and to be in compliance with that. But I agree, it should be something, it should be rolling.
Clarifying question.
sure.
If it is, if essentially we would just need our charter to reflect any changes to state law, that still requires vote?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, that's how I understood it from the solicitor.
okay.
Even though, you know, regardless, state law is gonna supersede anyways,
Mhm.
but it would be.
Unless you're reading them.
Yeah, it would be good practice just to bring it up to snuff, because I know we have gone through that process with zoning, where we reference Rhode Island, a section of general law. So that reference is never gonna change. It will get amended by the
Right.
General Assembly, it can be adjusted, but pretty standard that, you know, section 45 of the general state law, that won't change.
Mhm.
So as long as we have that reference, whatever updates get made at the state level, now we don't have to go back and revise our charter.
Yeah,
You know, because as you said, it's always changing, but the sections and the references
yeah.
are more likely to stay the same. That's how I'm at least understanding it
Yeah.
so far.
So I'm wondering if that's one lens that we should review the charter
Mhm.
with. Like, where does it specifically state the state law that we would in turn have to change in order to reflect what the existing state law is? And can we just remove that language, include the reference point?
Mhm.
And then I believe the town solicitor said that, you know, I guess dependent upon some of these changes, that it could just be one overarching question, that we've
Yeah.
updated the charter to essentially reflect state law. And then we never really have to
Right.
worry about it again, unless there's new state law that we would then have to incorporate. I don't mean to not like to have my back to you.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing about this.
I know.
The
We're
setup,
we're
yeah.
trying to have, you know, a good conversation, and we're limited. Okay. I think with the identification of the state law references, that's also where general code will come
Yes.
into play to
Mhm.
identify those for us.
Yeah.
So that was actually one of the things that I wanted to talk about under our recommendations to the council, that we recommend that they move forward with that, so we can get, that company can get started, they can identify and almost report back to
Yeah.
us.
Okay, I can take that.
The but before we made any formal recommendations, I wanted to chat some more.
Yeah.
As I mentioned in the first meeting, or asked in the first meeting, the reason that this body was convened was to just, the reason that it came about, that it was sort of identified that we should do a charter review commission, was because of the town council, the idea of having town council be 4-year terms instead of 2-year terms. It was interesting reading some of the going back and reading some of the discussion on that in the past, and also looking at the town administrator and reading some of that information in the past. Is that something that we want to start talking about now, or is that something we
No,
can?
we have articles, I put chapters and I meant articles.
Yeah.
Articles 1 through 5, so if there are any, if there were parts that we want to talk about for basic provisions, we have Article 2, elections, which would, Section 3 was just recently amended in 2018. Petitions was revised in 2010. There were some other sections. And then financial provisions, Article 3. Did anybody have any comments that they wanted to touch base on before we jump to town council and town administrator? And what I'll plan to do is, this certainly won't be the first and last time we talk about these
Right.
sections either. This is just kind of we're scratching the surface of a very in-depth, complicated document that has a lot of thought put into it, so I just want to make sure, I want to stress to the folks that might be watching on YouTube, who are general public, and the council, that, just because we have it on the agenda once, it doesn't mean it's gonna not come back, and
Right.
we're done with that.
Only because this was a pretty hot topic when the town council was doing the budget. Under section 5, I think, what article is this? Article 3, financial provisions of the town. Section 5, submission of budget to the council. Would it be appropriate for us to include language in that section that says essentially the budget, the prior fiscal year's numbers need to be updated through May 30th? Did you guys hear that conversation when we were reviewing the budget? Yeah, I'm sure you did. But essentially, we were looking at numbers from April, and the
The
council
actuals
didn't,
through-
actuals, yeah, through April, and the council didn't feel comfortable making a determination without having the most up-to-date actuals. So the finance department was able to deliver on, the May 30th, but it did cause us a little bit of churn. So I don't know if it's appropriate to include that language there that essentially says actuals need to be through April 30th to give us the most up-to-date. Like, obviously, we're not going to get June because we're discussing it in June.
Yeah.
But May 30th, we all felt very confident being able to then discuss and determine budget.
Yeah, I don't see an issue with that. There was a couple of questions that I just had as I was reading through that article. Because I know in years past, the first section, Section 2, submission of estimates, that no later than the first Monday in February of each fiscal year, the operating budget request shall be submitted to the town administrator. And then subsequently, the town administrator has to provide that budget fairly early on. My general question that I pose in my head is, how often are those deadlines held to? Do all the department heads have their numbers in? Does the town administrator have the information that he needs from his budget? Because that's also part of the process for the budget committee, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
That, you need that.
That's our starting point.
That's your starting point. So the later you get that,
The less time we have.
you're crunched more for time when you're presenting to the council in June. So I know the planning board gets to see the capital improvement process. We're part of that. That's our first stop. But that's only capital improvements. That's not the entirety of the budget. And then we pass along our recommendations to the Asset Management Commission. So, though, that was one of my questions in my head, because there's a lot of dates that get referenced here, and sometimes they're just like, you know, they're blown by.
Yep.
Without any repercussion, good, bad, or indifferent, but there's a process that, you know, I think we need to make sure that we're strongly wording that in order for a better functioning government, we need to make sure that we are hitting these dates appropriately. And if they're not being hit, then can you know, I hate to put in punishments or something like that, but it's a process that needs to be, you know, our charter is what we're run by. We need to respect that and honor it. And if we can't, then I feel like we need to, you know,
Change it, update it, so it's accurate. Yeah.
update it so it's accurate, and
Yeah,
then that,
I think that
you know.
the conversation would need to be had probably with Tony.
Mhm.
Am I on?
No.
Yes?
There you go.
Damn button.
Newbie.
Yes, newbie, I'm not used to this. I think the conversation we need to be have with Tony in regards to the feasibility and any issues he's potentially had in the past in reaching that February date.
Yep.
And then we can kind of go from there.
Okay.
And any date that we have in here, I think the appropriate conversation we need to be have with that department head
Right.
to make sure that it makes sense.
Yeah.
And, you know, do changes need to be made?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you feel this year that it ran the way, when you were reading this, did you feel like, oh yeah, that's what happened? Or did you feel like there were discrepancies?
Roughly, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, I can even, if you want, I can confirm whether we had it by February or not. Because I think our first meeting where we actually had numbers was the first week of February.
Okay.
So we had some, I don't know if we had all of them, but we had some, so we were able to start. So it might not be applicable to all department heads, because in that very first meeting, we're not gonna look at the entire budget.
Right.
No, we do a couple departments, you know, every week, so, there could be a little bit of wiggle room there, but.
Okay. Do you also get and this is just this might not be charter related, but this is more from my knowledge, when the planning board makes our recommendations to the asset management commission, do you guys see in the budget committee what our recommendations are?
No.
Okay.
We didn't. I mean, we saw, we had there's a separate part of the spreadsheet that has no capital expenditures.
Yep.
But that was it.
Okay.
So we didn't see any recommendations or anything like that. I mean, and then in the breakdown of the budget, they do call out specific capital expenditures
Yeah.
in the comment section, but that's really all we see.
Okay. That's good to know.
But one of the things that we did try to do as the budget committee was tie, you know, because once we get to May, we asked like, hey, what are all the, you know, where is the asset management committee with their capital expenditures listing, and
Yep.
can we tie that into this budget for this year?
Yep.
So we tried to perform that
Okay.
exercise.
I think that process could really be well-defined.
Yes.
Better.
Yep.
Because and again, this is just my experience with the planning board for the past however many years I've been doing this. But we always make our recommendations, and then I'll be listening to the budget committee present to town council, and, you know, planning board had said, well, maybe we needed, you know, 50,000 more for the fire truck.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even get referenced.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I want to make sure that, you know, it seems that a lot of departments are siloed,
Yes.
and I think we would function a lot better if we can tie in some language where those silos get to be broken down a little bit more.
Yep.
There's a little bit more
And tie them in a
discussion.
little bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bring in planning, bring in the asset
Yeah.
management, bring in, you know, budget, zoning, you know, whatever committees and departments need to be brought together.
Yeah, that intertwine with each other.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, we're all working on the same team, so what's the point of being so secluded from one another? you
I
know?
agree.
Okay. Sorry, that went off a little bit on a tangent with past experiences, but good for education. The one thing I had a question about, and we can pose this to David too, is that I see in this a lot, qualified voter. Like, I almost feel, and that with my background, we deal with a lot of building codes. There's a section in the building code that just gives definitions, you know, and then it references, okay, you know, when they're talking about accessibility, this is what they mean, or a compliant ramp, this is what they mean.
I had the same thoughts when I was reading through this.
You know, so like qualified voter, what does that mean? And then we have qualified this, it starts to become very subjective as opposed to very black and white. So
Especially if you're considering a reader, like just a town constituent that has no experience with town government.
right,
If you want them to be able to come in and understand this, that would be,
Yeah.
be very beneficial.
so it's almost like we need a definition section. I know it's silly, but it gives clarity.
Yeah. Yep.
And then that way, everybody's not going to our town solicitor to be like, well, legally, what does this mean? Or legally, what does this mean?
Is that something that we could find out if there's other charters that have that we could use? Maybe that's a question.
Yeah, I would certainly say so. Okay. The other part that I actually underlined in this, the section, Article 3, under Section 9, there's language that says, such petitions shall be upon forms prepared and provided by the town clerk. When an applicant comes before the planning board, there's forms that are already pre-populated in our comp plan and our subdivision and land use regulations. So I'm wondering if we also start to look at potentially standardizing forms that are referenced throughout this charter and, having an appendix.
Like Form 27A.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Rather
that's a
than-
great idea.
But even an appendix, or at least put them online so they're easily accessible. 'Cause
Yeah.
then you also save the town clerk time.
Yeah.
Having to get up forms for people.
Yep, yeah.
Well, I think especially forms that constituents might need to leverage, like I think it would be different if it's just internal, but any forms
Yeah.
that might be constituent facing. And maybe that's not something that is necessarily updated in the charter per se.
Right.
But wherever the charter lives on our website, can there also be
An
another,
appendix, yeah.
like landing,
Shared location, yeah.
on that website that would provide them with that access?
And then I only had two other things, and this is the last section, Section 10, Item C. It says, at least 400 qualified electors shall be necessary to constitute a quorum at any special town meeting. Logistically, do we have a place in town that can actually house 400 voters all in one location? I see CJ shaking his head no.
High school?
Because otherwise, we're looking at utilizing multiple locations, like the high school auditorium and cafeteria and gymnasium. So there's just a lot of logistical things that that popped up in my
Yeah.
head.
It's a great point.
So granted, I know, there's phase 2 of our multi-generational center that has a larger space. Whether or not that comes to fruition in the near future, then it was just one of those logistical things. It's like, okay, if we get 400
If this actually
people-
happens, yeah.
If the petition is met and, we get the signatures that need to be, if we get the 500 qualified signatures, or 500 signatures from qualified electors, not qualified voters, which language situation there. It's like, okay, well, how can we realistically have this town meeting without renting out the amp, down in Providence? Just because we would need a large meeting space that none of our public buildings can house unless it's all separated out.
Yeah.
So, again.
I just wonder if that number's informed by like state law.
That would be a very good question.
Good question.
Because I know the recall election, it's a third of the previous election that the position was voted upon. So if there's for positions of town council and town administrator, it would be 1/3 of the, what was that, 2022 election? Is that when you guys got voted in?
2024.
Like I said, this is meeting number 7 for me today. So my time has been flying. I'm sorry. Thank you. 2024.
It does seem like an arbitrary number,
Yeah.
because it's not a percentage of the electorate. It's just, 500 qualified electors of the town, and then 400 qualified electors of the town. Well,
Where did that come from?
where did that come from? And it's
Why?
not, yeah.
I mean, I guess, could we see when that number got put in here? Because was the population of the town a lot smaller then? So
That would have been
built
19,
up, that was a lot higher percentage of the population?
right, that would have been 1989.
Not that much
Yeah.
smaller.
Yeah. So much further than 2022. So, yeah, I can ask David about that one. Okay.
The only thing I had in Article 3 was on Section 7. I was just curious how far in advance that public hearing usually happens. I know the prior Charter Review Committee had suggested putting 14 days in there, and then I saw that there was some debate about whether that was too far in advance because things are kind of happening right up to the last minute, and then so somebody had suggested maybe 7 days, and it looked like, I mean, obviously neither of those proposals passed. So what's like the norm on that? The council shall schedule a public hearing on the budget prior to adoption. Like the public hearing happens a few days before or a week before. I was curious why the prior committee wanted to
Well, we
have
had
14.
2 public hearings.
Right, like a week before, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
week before, and then we followed up with the second budget meeting that had the public hearing,
Right.
and then we finalized the budget.
And that's standard, as far as we know. Like that happens every year.
For the
yeah.
budget,
Yeah.
yeah, I think for specific to the budget.
Then I wouldn't see the need to. It was just interesting that there's not a number of days there. It's just a hearing.
Where
prior
does
to
it
adoption.
reference the public hearing timeline that you're referring to with the you're saying that was one of the
Where
previous recommendations?
yeah,
not
it's in the.
specific to budget?
If you go to the document Jeff sent that has like the whole, so it's the charter proposed amendments Word document, that really long one.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go down to Article 3, I have to make it all the way down there.
Not section 7?
It should have been Section 7, or at least that's what I had in my notes. Is it not there?
Well, it's just the council shall schedule a public
I
hearing
see.
on the budget.
And they didn't make I see. Okay. Yeah, I thought on the YouTube videos that I watched, at least, that came up, but maybe they didn't end up submitting it as a suggestion, right?
Okay.
So that dropped out for whatever reason.
Okay. Anything else on Article 3 at first blush?
I've got a couple items.
Okay.
In Section 2, is there a reason we parse out the budget process in a completely separate section than the one that we're looking at? Because we reference Article 8, which is the budget process. So I don't know if there's wiggle room to combine the two, just so they're closer to each other and we don't have to reference it. I mean, there very well could be a reason why. I mean, Article 3 seems a lot more high level from a financial perspective, where Article 8 is the actual detailed process, so I don't know if that was the reason why, they're separated, but I don't know if we want to consider kind of combining the two so it's all in one location. Just food for thought, really.
Are you referring to section 2 submission of estimates?
Yeah.
And then,
Well, I just, that's where I noticed, just in general, that because there we have a reference to Article 8. That's the first reference we have to Article 8. When you go to Article 8, that is the entire budget process.
okay,
So should we move the entire budget process up into the financial provisions of the town section? So it's all in one location? Or again, because it's too detailed,
yeah.
we just leave it in its own section?
I wonder if people are like, okay, submission of estimates, that's enough information for me, and then they just, you know, don't even refer to section
Yeah.
8, but I think, yeah, I think that that definitely makes sense to consolidate, but I'm just wondering if, like, from an ease of reading perspective.
Yeah, it looks like the bulk, a lot of these have been amended in the budget format.
Yeah,
I think all but 2 sections of the Article 8 have been amended one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I'm perfectly fine keeping it where it is if we decide to. I just saw an opportunity to potentially, combine the two, and just so anybody reading this could, high level read what's going on, and then see right there, okay, yep,
Right.
nope, and this is the budget process. Obviously, don't need an answer now either. Just food for thought.
No, I think, like I said, high-level discussion right now. People will be hearing these discussions, agreeing with us, disagreeing with
Yeah.
us.
Yep.
Town council might come back after hearing about this meeting, be like, no, we want you to focus on these 2 sections, and,
Oh, yeah.
and that's that, so.
Did we get any feedback from the town administrator or the town council? on
Not
things
at this
they'd like
time.
us? Okay.
Nope, not at this time, yeah.
is that a request of the town council?
Yes.
Okay. Because I think last we spoke about it at town council, we left off that, I mean, and I don't want to belabor it, but general code, the town solicitor was going to provide us with some of the charter review committee, that pre-work that had been completed, and then partnering with the town administrator.
Yep.
So if the town council's opinion on where we should focus, let me circle back. I don't believe they necessarily had an opinion on where
Yeah.
we should focus. I think we said that those are like really the 3 buckets that we should focus on for now.
Because I also, there are also our eyes and ears on the ground. They're the ones that are gonna be getting phone calls about what we're doing, more than likely. So if they're hearing things from constituents, then I certainly would, leave the door wide open for them
Right.
to communicate that to us, to say, hey, we've been hearing a lot of complaints or a lot of comments about this section. Let's take a good look at that section and understand what we can do to make it better, so we can certainly address it in that manner too.
I would love to know how many constituents have complaints about the charter.
I would love to know how many constituents have read the charter, first off.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, does anybody else have anything for Article 3 at this time?
I did have one more item.
Okay.
In section 3, the second and third sentences threw me off when I first read them, because the way that I understood these is when the budget committee was originally formed, this is how it worked. The preceding sentences are then how it works now. Do we still need the historical information on that? Or is there room to just strike it because that's not how it works anymore?
I think we can certainly,
Because,
But
when
that-
I first read it, it said, each member of the town council shall initially appoint 1 member of the committee. I was thinking, when an outsider reads that, you'd think, oh, the new council is gonna appoint, each person's gonna appoint 1.
yep.
But that's not how it works. It works, if you start reading the 4th sentence, that's how it works currently. So, it was a little confusing when I first read it, so I figured that, if we could strike it, it would probably make sense.
Yeah.
I think if we can get the document as close to
Current
how
process?
the process, or how the process should be,
Yeah, yeah,
not how it used to be.
yeah.
So Rebecca, each member of the council didn't have 1 person to nominate? for the
No.
budget? Okay.
I was confused by that as well, but I'm like, maybe I'm just not reading it right. But yeah, no, definitely not. There's
And then
definitely.
it gets, that gets even more confusing when you have staggered terms.
Yes,
Like,
when that goes,
Okay,
so then
so-
I literally went to the town website to say,
Yeah.
hey, like, do any of us have staggered terms? And no, everybody's on a 3-year term.
Okay.
So that's when I realized, oh, this is describing what originally happened when, the budget committee first got put into place.
But would it be more beneficial to have staggered terms?
You can make an argument for it.
I know that's one thing I really like about the planning board and the zoning board,
Yeah.
is that we had, when I first started, there were more seasoned folks that were on the planning board, and I sat on the edge, and I learned, and I
That's
listened.
what I did this year with the budget.
Yeah, I heard a lot of how the process worked, and now, I'm the vice chair of the planning board, so it's, you have that opportunity to have that overlap and that historical knowledge of like, okay, this is how it worked last year. Now we have, some fresh faces in the committee. Let's mentor them, let's get them up to speed, and then by the time my term's done, they're well-versed in everything. They can come in and run the show for a while. So I would like to discuss a little bit more the option of having staggered terms, because you do get that historical knowledge. And I just find that it's better to have that as opposed to like right now, we're 5 newbies at a charter review. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm feeling a little rudderless right now, trying to lead the charge on such an important task. So that would certainly be a benefit for advocating for staggered terms.
You have two.
Technically, I think we do have staggered
Yeah.
terms.
Okay.
Because we have one individual that will, I'm pulling it up right now, so, just so we can,
I think 2 individuals term out at the end of the year.
yes, 2 individuals will term out at the end of this year. 1 will be next year, and then 2 will be the following year.
Okay.
So they currently are set up to stay staggered,
Yeah,
which is a good thing.
yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
But I don't think that was like intended initially,
No.
you know?
I mean, well, the original setup did, they just stuck with that calendar.
Okay.
So if somebody fell off, like even now, if somebody falls off, somebody takes that term, but they don't just start 3 years, they finish off the term of the person that was there before,
Right.
the seat that was there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's like built-in staggered terms, which is
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right, okay. So maybe, yeah,
Just clean up the language to reflect that there are staggered terms.
Yeah,
yep,
It doesn't need to say starting on.
yeah.
sure. So maybe that whole section looks to get revised and
Cleaned.
updated and
Yeah.
cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I know in times past, there've also been budget committee members that will resign because they're not in agreement with town council's final budget too. There's been instances of that,
Interesting.
so.
Well, your comments were interesting because I think when we get to that charter review section, it might make sense to
To have
have
staggered terms.
to have a continual charter review committee
Yeah.
that's always looking at it. And, again, we don't want to make it be an expense for the town, but to have it sort of looking towards the next election and what the priorities are, and have that sort of as a ongoing.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and I don't know if there's opportunity, but I'm hearing a lot of it. I mean, I saw it with the budget committee. Is there a way we can work transfer of knowledge into the charter at all? For like committees and stuff like that? Because I think that that's a big problem. If you have the whole committee quit and then you have 5 new people start,
Right.
again, like, kind of open-ended, trying to figure out where to go ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's opportunity there, which is, I'm just throwing it out there, but
Yeah. I wonder if that belongs in the resolution for the committees. So like that's the expectation that, especially with the budget committee, once the budget committee concludes their work, an SOP
yeah, yeah,
is like expected.
yeah.
So in the event that there is any, if there are
A lot of
reservations or
turnover, individuals can pick up that SOP,
Exactly.
read it and go, okay, high level, this is how this should work.
Yeah.
Correct.
And just for basic knowledge, SOP, we're referring to
Standard operating
standard
procedure, yep.
operating procedure. Yep, perfect.
There's that definition that needs to go in that.
No, I know I'll throw out some terms and people will look at me, I'm just like,
Cross-eyed, yeah.
let's just want to make sure everyone's understanding what we're talking about, that's all. So it certainly sounds like we have a lot to look at with Article 3. Okay, shall we move on to Article 4?
Sure.
Now, before we climb into town council and town administrator portions, I do want to underscore, we're looking at this as a organizational body. We're not looking at it at any specific individual, how individuals have held these positions.
Absolutely.
And the comments that we're going to make are not any reflection of any of those individuals, past, present, or future. And I want to really underscore that because, you know, I want to be respectful of the people that are holding these positions, but the comments that we will make tonight and in the future aren't reflective of the people that are holding those positions.
Sure.
I just want to make that perfectly clear to the public that's watching. I want to make sure that the 5 of us are all on that page, because I know sometimes it will get, well, it might get twisted that we are singling out a person in one of these positions and we're making these changes because of that one person. That's not the intent, and that's not our the reason why we're here. We're just here to make sure that we are making sure that the roles of both town council and town administrator are working as effectively and efficiently as we can that will best serve our town.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to put that out there, because I don't want anybody coming after us because you're and pointing fingers at us saying, oh, well, you're doing this because of so-and-so. I don't want to play that game. It's not worth it. So anything that we say, you know, people can take it to heart the way they want to. They can feel the way they want to about what we say. But again, it's not a performance evaluation based on anybody that's past, present, or future.
Beautifully said.
Thank you. I was thinking about that, and it's like, okay.
Well, I think, I think one of the things that we came across when we were discussing the budget committee piece is that looking at these, it's not like it's not going to happen now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the nice thing about looking at it, is you're looking at a hypothetical future and what's the best way for this all to be functioning. Yep. How is it functioning? Is it following what we're doing? So it's good that we are talking in the future, but I do appreciate that being said. I think it's really important that we talk about it just from a point of view of what's best for the town.
I know former Councilor Ogier had brought up the town manager position, and the argument was, well, we have 2 very qualified people running for town administrator. And I don't think that was the intent, was to insult you and say, no, we don't want you.
Right.
No, we just want to make sure we have well-qualified people that are running the town.
Absolutely.
This past election, we were fortunate enough to have that.
Yeah.
Some elections, we might not be. So again, it was just something that was weighing on my mind. I don't want it to weigh us down and get us dragged through the mud for it. So again, I'll be quiet now and just open it up for discussion for the town council Article 4.
So specific to section 2 qualifications, members of the town council shall be qualified electors of the town of North Smithfield. No town council and shall hold no other public office or employment in the service of the town or an elective office in the state or federal government. Sorry. The proposed charter amendments, I was always under the assumption if we refer to the proposed amendment, it states, no town council member shall hold any other paid employment in the service of the town, nor be eligible to accept any such employment for a period of 1 year following the expiration of the term for which he was elected. I thought that was our charter, so I wonder if there's like some misinformation, because that wasn't obviously adopted.
Right.
So I'm wondering if there's just like misinformation out there. So when I actually read the qualifications, when I compared them, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I just assumed that was our charter. So that's why when I read it, I actually thought that this was already adopted, because,
I think a sunset is really smart.
oh yeah,
In general, I think that's just good governance.
Yeah.
Personally, but you know, it makes sense to have something in there about, oh, you can't go right from being on the council to becoming the head of whatever.
right. So we like that proposal.
Yeah, I realize it was put out to vote in 2018. So I'd be curious to understand how many voted to approve it and how many voted to reject it. Just to see what that discrepancy was, because if it was an overwhelming rejection of that proposal, then I would say, well,
Yeah.
that was 2018, so, you know, quite a few years ago. 9 years ago? No,
Not
sorry.
very much.
7.
Like I said, it's been a long day. That's why I'm not on the budget committee.
Yeah, like, is it worth
I mean,
resurrecting it
Right.
again?
We also can look at, too, that was a non-federal election year,
Okay,
so you might have had less voters, too,
sure.
so less eyes on it.
Yep,
Yeah.
okay.
But I would be interested in seeing those results.
Yeah,
And that's exactly why, when we were initially at the town council meeting, when we were initially discussing where to focus, and we were especially discussing timeline, I saw value in us meeting collectively after the vote to understand the outcomes. And that's not currently in like our committee's scope. And maybe that's something that we can discuss at another time, but I really do see value in kind of doing a post-mortem to say, how are these questions received? What was rejected? What was approved? So then we don't have to resurrect it in the future. Especially if it was like the majority rejected, then our constituents don't see value in that change.
yep.
And putting together a quick summary of all that happened for the next commission
Right.
to pick up.
An SOP.
Yeah. Yes.
I feel like we need to have pollsters at the, exit polls as people are coming out. Well, do you want to share what your thoughts are on these, and how did you vote, and why did you vote a certain way? And that's a lot of people outside the polls, but it could be.
Or even a survey.
Or a survey, yeah. Actually, we had, a good turnout for the Hallwell Review Committee. We had an online survey, and we got a lot of good feedback. So it could be something as easy as that, and then link it in the town newsletter. So that could be an option.
I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate this into notes.
Okay. I know Ms. Hamilton said to not focus on the gender language, but there were so many he's in this. It's like, oh, man.
I had the same notes. And
I underlined every
I don't know if it's a
time.
question for the solicitor, but could we put a blanket item to vote where it would just say we're going to fix these things and not have to call out every section of the charter? I don't know if that's allowable.
That's a great question
but
for the attorney,
that-
I think.
Yes, that and like a quick spell check or grammar check, just to
Yeah.
cover everything.
Right,
And
and that's the same kind of thing like with, whenever we say we're going to put something in the newspaper, can we say we're gonna put it on the town website, things like that. I wonder if those can just be,
Yeah.
just a blanket statement, because
Right.
there's really no meat to it. It's just,
Right.
it's just updating, so.
Modernizing the language.
Exactly. So I don't know if there's.
The downside to that, and I don't disagree with you, I do think it needs to be updated. The downside to that is, does that make the important work that we're doing get lost in the weeds when we're saying, oh, let's update this, let's update that, let's update this, let's update that? Then when we're doing something that is really crucial, do people, as you
Get
know, as
fatigued.
Jeff pointed out,
Yeah.
do they get fatigue and just not even look at it?
Yeah, I think if we can like synthesize that, modernizing the language, it's one question.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Updating the charter to reflect state law, that's one question, right? And if there's opportunity to, in advance of the election, I think we've done this before, I mean, I've definitely seen it at the state level, but can you send out a pamphlet that has a breakdown of what you're actually voting on?
That typically comes from the Secretary of State, that you'll get the paper
Yeah.
Right.
in your mail. It gives you all the information for your jurisdiction, so, or district, rather.
With all
Thank
the
you.
questions.
With all the questions, who's running, who's voting, who you're voting for, bond questions, what the implications of all those bond questions are, and then local questions. So
Okay.
like if we have bonds that are gonna go out to vote, what does that mean for the taxpayer? How much are we responsible for that funding? So I think that's a great question. We could look into how that Secretary of State pamphlet that gets put out, what information is gonna be needed from us for, as far as education goes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I know, with the last charter review, there were public hearings, obviously, and public education forums, so people could come and ask questions. They had joint meetings with the town council, those two YouTube videos that I sent along, and there were people that were able to come and speak to that. So I think certainly we want to make sure that we're utilizing all forms of media
Yeah.
to really be able to educate as we can. Especially if it's things that we are definitely passionate about, and we want to make sure that this is truly making our town better. The one thing that I had an issue with is under the town council, section 6, the quorum, where it says, but a smaller number may adjourn from time to time. And that, to me, right there screams open meeting violation,
Yeah.
right there. Like, they, you know, 3 members of the town council shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of business. Stop. We don't need a smaller number to adjourn from time to time, because that's gonna be, I feel like that's just asking for problems in the future. Especially with all the open meetings, laws and the ethics commission, we wanna make sure that our government is as transparent as it can be.
I wonder if, so 3 members of the town council shall constitute a quorum, but a smaller number than 3 is how I interpreted it, may meet from time to time. So I'm thinking, for instance, like the police station. So Kim and David are on that subcommittee. So it's obviously just the 2 of them. So is that what it's referring to?
No, because it
Or
says
is it
may
saying
adjourn.
smaller number than, is it referring to 5, right? Like, then
Yeah.
I think that's where it should say, but 2, a maximum of 2 may adjourn from time to time.
I just get concerned with that language.
Yeah, the language is not clear.
Yeah.
It can really open up a lot of problems.
It should say, well, if that were the case, it should say may convene from time to time.
Yeah.
Not may adjourn from time to time.
And I think that would, as new committees come and go, that could be stated in resolution that, 2 members of the council shall be acting members of such and such a committee.
Yeah.
And that becomes part of the resolution, because we'll take the example of Kim and David being part of the MBRTF. They're acting as the MBRTF. They're not acting in a role that's responsible for town council activities. So I think we could take care of that ambiguity in the committee resolutions.
Yeah, okay.
And then that quorum section, I also have a feeling that David could point us to state laws that would outline what quorums mean and how that's defined per state law.
Yeah.
And then the requirements for emergency meetings. Because it talks about at least 48 hours notice and all this stuff, but, you know, there's also the need, there may be the need in the future that the town council needs to have an emergency meeting to make a decision on the town's behalf. So we can simply just put in that the town council will comply with state law as it relates to quorums and emergency meetings, you know. And then the same thing for section 7 is just, there's a lot of language in there that said that, but I feel like that can be streamlined pretty easily with just referencing state laws.
What section are you referring to?
Section 7, meetings. And I also felt that it was interesting that that last line for executive sessions, provided that all votes are taken in public. I know in some past executive sessions, it's been noted, there was, you know, whoever, whatever member of the town council will come out and say, we'll reconvene in open session, let the record show that there was one vote taken. Well, according to this, that vote should be taken in public. That's how I'm reading it. So, I don't know if everybody else are.
I wonder if that has to do with legal proceedings and just the way they need to be conducted. So that would be a question I would ask, whether that's something that needs to be compliant with legal.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it has to do with the lawsuit.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it can't be disclosed.
right.
That makes it really hard for the town council to do their job.
Right,
Yep.
right.
And you know, this section of the meetings has not been amended at all
Since
since
1956.
since its adoption. So,
Oh my
you know, clearly things have changed a little bit, and
Just a little.
maybe processes and state laws were one way back when this was adopted, so now we're, again, bringing it up to current practice, as Kevin was saying earlier. There was one other section that I had a question for. Under section 8 powers, subsection 10, it says to provide rules and regulations with respect to vacations of town officials and employees, except to those to the school department. And then that got me thinking about what Mr. Gibbs has said previously, that there's work on an employee handbook. So it's almost like, okay, can we, like,
Get rid of that.
can we get
And
rid
have
of
that
that and
be-
have an
Yeah.
a reference, employee handbook that's, you know, maintained by the personnel board, or, it just seems like very,
Yeah, the
I
council.
don't know if that's been on
I
one
had
of
a
your
I had a
agendas
similar thought.
about, you know, the town clerk's vacation recently, if you guys had to vote on that or something, but it's just it seems like very old language that just does not seem appropriate at the, you know, as we move forward with, you know, employee handbooks and all that good stuff. And then the other one that is based off my experiences, to take any action necessary, this is subsection 14. It says to take any action necessary to give effect to any vote of the town's electors at a regular or special election, authorizing the issuance of bonds for any purpose, and to complete all the details of the bond transaction. There's one bond that I think is still outstanding that was voted for open space. And we still have a good amount of money sitting around, not being used to purchase open space. So I'm, based on that, my thought process was that I want to provide a little bit more language that says something to the effect of within a reasonable time frame. So we're not, because obviously the will of the voters was so many years ago to purchase open space.
Yeah.
You know, this might have
I
been
think-
2010, like.
I think within a reasonable time is
Too
not
vague.
Yeah,
specific
you have
enough.
to define it further.
Yeah.
Yep. But and then we also, you know, not to bring up sore subjects, but we also have this situation with the police station where bond was approved in 2014, and we're still working on it. So it's just to make sure, you know, hold as a qualified voter, for us to hold the council accountable for something that the voting public approved to move forward with.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we need to put in, like, within 2 years, because that aligns with the council term, they need to move on it in that 2 years,
Yeah.
because they were elected to, along with this bond, to move things forward.
Yeah.
So,
It's an excellent point.
I would really like to see some timeframes come from us, in addition to some of these other timeframes and dates, as it relates to the regulation and authorization of bonds and progress being made. Because otherwise, we're, you know, being in the architecture and construction industry, what was approved back in 2014 for the construction of this building and the police station
Much different money.
is
Right.
very different, particularly post-COVID.
Yeah.
Very different dollars than what it was in 2014. I mean, don't get me started, but just seeing the way some of these bonds that we have approved, that the way that they've played out, I would really like to give some more meat to the charter, to give the town council, I don't want to say kick in the pants, but I'm going to say kick in the pants
Timeframes that they have to
get
stick
stuff,
to.
to get
Yeah.
stuff done.
Yeah.
Because, you know, 2 years is a short period of time, and we can't just keep kicking the can down the road. We need to move forward and have
I mean,
actionable
I
items.
mean, when thinking through that, you gotta think also through, is like, how you're gonna hold them accountable to it, though.
Mm.
We just gotta get creative with that.
Yeah.
Because if, say there was somebody on the council that didn't want that, or voted against it, and they,
Yeah.
you know, they have a voice, so they can try to drag things out, so stuff doesn't get done in 2 years, then what happens?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? But the voters voted for it, that's what they wanted.
yep.
Yeah, I think that open space one is a really good example too, because the voters have, when was that on the ballot? That bond?
Was that 2014, 2010? The open space bond? It was sooner? 2007.
Wow.
A
Right.
couple of years ago.
So that $2 million
Almost 20 years ago.
could have gotten a
A
lot
lot more.
in 2007, but we're still sitting on it. I think maybe a little bit has been spent, but not the full amount. There could have been a lot of opportunity there, you know?
Yeah.
So, and again, not pointing fingers at anybody, but it's just historical
Yeah.
facts.
It's
that-
reference.
That I want to
Yeah.
reference back to.
Absolutely.
$2007, really? Wow, I thought it was a lot sooner than that. Anyways. another item that I had, and honestly, I'm gonna tell the four of you, if you guys have things that you wanna bring up, please talk over me. I don't wanna be the only voice on these videos. That is by no means my intent to continue talking, but please interrupt me as you need to, as we scroll through our multi-page document. One of the things that I saw under section 10, when it references audits, it's the second sentence, such audit may be conducted. I think we just need to
Will.
have shall be
Yeah.
conducted. Whenever I see may, that's too much ambiguity.
Yeah.
It opens it up for interpretation.
And dealing with so many contracts, I always go with shall, they, this body shall do this. And it would only be of benefit for us. I don't see why an audit would be detrimental for the process. And Kevin, again, I'll let you speak more to the budgeting process, but I think that would be helpful for you guys as a budget committee to look at the audit
Yeah.
and see, okay, here's where
Yeah.
things are falling. That was it for me on the town council part. I know former Councilman Ogier had also posed to talk about staggering the terms and extending terms. Like we said, 2 years is a quick time for things to get accomplished, especially, if there's that one counselor that decides, I voted against that, I'm gonna try to stall it as much as I can. So, and then it also goes back to the historical knowledge and understanding, okay, Rebecca, you and David are new to the council, so I'm sure there's a lot being learned and where folks have been. There have been people that have run for council that have been here for ages, and then there have been people that have been here, that run for council that have been here for a couple of years. So having that balance of I'm gonna say fresh blood and a different outlook than what we're used to, add that in with some collaboration of the seasoned, yes, I like that. The seasoned counselors, and put that together, it would be a really pretty good force to move forward with.
I really, when I was looking through the past documentation, I really liked the idea of having 7 counselors as opposed to 5 and having staggered terms, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't know what other people thought about that, but, and I know it didn't pass, but we may be in a place where people see value in that, and there might be room for education around it, but I would love to hear what everybody else thought of that when they were reading through the documentation. And
Yeah, I had found on one of the YouTube videos, the discussion, I thought there was kind of a good debate about the pros and cons of 2 versus 4 year and the staggering, and also the 5 to 7 thing. So I thought there were good arguments on both sides. I mean, I was sort of persuaded by the 4-year term and staggering. On the 5 versus 7, I wasn't sure. One of the objections was the idea that 7 was a lot of good candidates to find, and what if we don't, have that many people running or that many good candidates running? So I guess I had less of a commitment one way or the other on 5 versus 7, but on the 4-year terms and staggering, I found the arguments pretty compelling. The institutional memory arguments, I think, are good. One of I know in the debate there was some concern that a 4-year term might deter some people from running because that's a long time commitment, but then somebody pointed out that maybe not having to run for re-election every 2 years would also be really nice, that you'd have a 4-year term if you do decide to go through with it. And I actually am kind of more inclined to that argument for 4 years, that running for election is a hard thing, I assume. And having to do it every 2 years seems really onerous.
Yes.
And we have a recall provision. So there was some, in the debate that I was watching, there was some back and forth about, well, you need 2-year terms to keep people really accountable, closely accountable to voters. It seems to me that because we have a recall provision in the charter, there is a way to if you have somebody who you don't want in office for 4 years, then voters have a mechanism for doing something about that, or at least trying to. So.
If we had 7 counselors, could you imagine how long our meetings would be? So my vote on that is no. But I do like the 4-year term and the staggering. I think that David and I have been very lucky to have Kim, John, and Claire on the council because they do have that institutional knowledge. I think it's a perfect balance because having a council with all new counselors would be wild. Right,
It
like
usually-
the budget.
Right, it usually doesn't happen, but it
Right.
could.
It could.
And so
It could.
why are we, right,
Why-
so
like
why
there's-
are we
so it's
letting
risk
it be that way?
mitigation.
Right,
Right?
I mean,
It's,
and we already have it for the school committee.
right,
yeah.
The school committee is already staggered terms.
exactly.
And I don't remember how long they've been staggered terms, but, that works pretty successfully for them.
Yeah.
Not only that, but I would assume that there's a pretty steep learning curve here, and that I don't know about judging somebody after just 2 years for that role, right? Giving somebody a chance to kind of get up to speed, find their voice, figure out what they're doing for the first, I would assume it takes probably a year or more to really feel comfortable, or at least I think I would feel that way. So that seems like a benefit too, is having more of a record, right, and letting somebody who's been elected really have some time to carve out a
Yeah. And I think too, like, one of the reasons why I personally ran was because I saw a lot of opportunity, and how much opportunity could you actually influence in 2 years? Because you are learning, right? Like, you're probably learning for at least the first year. Then the second year, you're maybe more able to influence that opportunity, but then you're campaigning again. So I definitely see the value in the 4-year staggered terms for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Now, I would assume one thing we would want to think about is to a certain voter, that's going to look less democratic than what we have now,
Yeah.
right? And
That's
so,
why I'd be in favor of 2.
yeah.
The school committee, they have a couple, they have a couple of people with 2-year terms and a couple of 4, or are they all with 4?
No, so when you implement something, when you implement staggered terms,
Yeah,
when we go back to that budget,
yeah,
that's showing how it gets implemented, right?
Yeah.
When you
So it's
create
all-
something like that, but then once it's created, then it just keeps going where everybody has the same. So in the beginning, you do have someone with a shorter term.
yeah.
And then,
Once it's instituted, then.
correct,
You have fully staggered.
yeah, yeah.
And it's funny, the term, membership terms for a school committee was amended in 2018.
Yeah, I
So
remember
I'm just
voting
looking
on
for that question as it relates to that. And I'm failing miserably at finding it right now.
It's okay,
But
we'll come
it-
back to this.
It's,
but-
it's interesting, though, that, in 2018, it was amended in 2014 and 2018, and it's outlining staggered terms of 4 years. So it's like, okay, well, clearly 1 year, one election cycle, we were feeling one way, and then when this was proposed for the town council to be 4-year term staggered, apparently that wasn't good enough for the town council. We don't want to do that. We wanted to, so again, it's interesting to see the difference between the two.
Well, people may have had enough time now with the school committee being
Yeah.
staggered with 4-year terms
Yep.
that they feel comfortable with it. I think when sometimes you're trying it out for the first time and you haven't had enough
Sure.
time under your belt. And so now we're seeing what that looks like, and the world hasn't come crashing down around us, and
Change is difficult.
change is
You know,
difficult.
it's inevitable, it's difficult, it's gonna happen, whether you like it or not. But I have found North Smithfield residents sometimes have a little bit harder time with change. I mean, I've been here since I was born, so I can totally commiserate with those folks. I have a hard time that the Christensen Orchard's not there anymore, so, but alas, here we are, we're moving forward.
I think in reflecting on some of the conversation that was had regarding town manager versus town administrator and 4-year staggered terms, I don't necessarily know if the town council wasn't open to it. I think it just felt, from reflecting on the conversations, I think it felt very rushed.
Yes.
So I do think if we are better prepared, and we are, right, we have a pretty significant lead time now, I feel as though if we were to like really broach the subject again, that they might be more amenable.
As far as the number of counselors, I've worked in towns that have 3 selectmen, I've worked in towns that have 5 counselors, I've worked in towns that have 7. And it all works in their different ways. So it's, when we're looking at the number of people that are sitting at this table, I think we should really take a look at what's the number that's gonna best be representative of the majority of voters here. Because I know we have, there's 7 on the planning board, there's 7 on the zoning board, but that includes, 2 of those 7 are alternates. They're non-voting unless they there's an absence. So I think maybe that's one thing that we can study and look at our neighboring towns around us to see how successful they are with their town council or their board of selectmen.
Yeah.
Just to really, I'm hesitant to go to, I would not recommend 3 just because I feel like there's enough people here in this town that having 3 people is not enough to have a well representation of or a good cross-section of the town.
Yeah.
Because I think we have a really good mix of, as you were saying, Rebecca, a really good crew on the council now as it stands. So we have the seasoned folks, we have the fresh faces that are learning the ropes and everything. So I think we should probably take a look at that a little bit more and understand, if we go to 7, what does that mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there's lots of additional language that would then need to be updated throughout to accommodate all that as well.
Well, and if we are all in favor of putting forth staggered terms, saying, oh, let's change to 7 too, might be a little too much for people.
Right.
As you said,
Yeah.
change is hard. So maybe tackle one thing at a time, and maybe
Yep.
maybe 7 isn't the right number. I just thought it was interesting that we
Sure.
looked at it, and yeah.
I think one other thing that comes to mind is just, and I think picking up on that point is, I would also think we'd want to think about, depending on what we decide on the appointed versus elected town administrator, making those 2 changes in tandem, and this is back to what you were saying, Kevin, about like being less comfortable with 4-year terms. If we're both going to 4-year terms on the council and an appointed TA or town manager, I think that might look like a double whammy to voters who say, I'm really losing control over my town government, right? So thinking about how those 2 things interact and whether we could do both or neither, or one or the other, depending on what we think is a bigger priority. But I would worry that they might interact with one another in a way that would really sink them both.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think, our intent is certainly not to cut anyone's vote short, It's, again, we're looking at how can our town government be better run, better transparency, a lot of, how can we be more efficient? Because if we go back to the 2-year term, it's tough to get things done in 2 years. You know, I'm still working on, there have been projects where I've worked on for 3 years, 4 years, and, you know, if I left as a project manager, then what would happen to that project, you know?
Right, right.
So, you know, we want to make sure that we're electing stewards, good stewards to carry along and carry our vote and be our representation, as we do with, you know, the presidential elections, our state senator and representatives. I believe do we have, our senators are 6-year terms, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know.
State
we-
reps are 2, senators are 6.
Okay. So, you know, we can still maintain our voice and our vote through different elected officials, if you will, I guess. You know, it's just the timing is now gonna be, may be adjusted, you know. What else has everybody got? Or have we gotten charter fatigue and?
I think this has been really great dialogue.
Yeah.
I know I have Article 5 on here. Do we want to talk about town administrator? Or history about how we've gone from back and forth between town administrator, town manager? I know that was out in front of the voters back in 2018 to go from the administrator role to manager role.
I came in feeling very strongly about this and feeling like I would like to see it changed, but after what you just said, I feel that the 4-year terms staggered is like that's a hill I'd rather die on, quite frankly.
No, I agree with that. The one thing you know, we can certainly identify priorities as we go through this process. But one of the things that I, in addition to looking at how other towns have been functioning with town administrator and town manager positions, you know, I look over to our neighbor in Burrville. They have an appointed town manager, and they've been having a lot of success there.
Lincoln as well.
Lincoln has a appointed town manager, so, but then we also have town administrators where we've had successes in the past as
Yeah.
well. So it's like, maybe what's the best bang for our buck?
Yeah.
You know, and again, if we're starting to think about prioritizing, if this is one that, you know, okay, maybe, you know, it failed for a reason, and, you know, if we start to hear from the public of, you know, we're really okay, we wanna maintain our vote for the town administrator.
Perhaps we start looking at qualifications,
Yep.
not just being somebody who lives in town.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's exactly the question I wrote. Can we list any other qualifications other than a qualified elector?
And that might be something where we look at other charters throughout the state and say, what are other people listing, what other towns are being run, do we feel are being run really well, and what that have an administrator or mayor, and what are their qualifications?
I had a thought, Jeff, while you were initially going over the town administrator versus town manager. I mean, Doug saw a lot of value in resurrecting this. I have heard dialogue in the town from town constituents about town manager versus town administrator. I wonder if it's more so we give both questions to the town council with pros and cons. And then the town council, and we say, we feel very strongly that only one of these questions should be on, you know, this ballot. And then the town council determines, based on pros and cons, based on our recommendations and feedback, which of the two should they prioritize for at least that election year.
Well, and maybe after public input too.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
could we do a survey?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
No. With
Yep.
those exact questions, just to try to get some input from people ahead of time?
yeah.
Does anybody know what the tally was on this in 2018? Did it lose by a lot?
It was fairly
Pretty
close.
That's
Yeah.
close.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was fairly close,
Oh.
from what I recall. I don't remember the exact numbers, but.
Just curious, yeah. I'd be interested in just kind of, to the extent that we could dredge up what the arguments were
Yeah.
for and against, and what arguments, I guess against in particular, since it failed, like gained real traction. And I mean, that might be hard to figure out. We don't know exactly why people vote the way they do. Back to your point about, talking to voters out. But the survey idea, right, would collect some information on the front end. It seemed like in the YouTube presentation, there was a bit of a back and forth that I thought was really interesting. And it seemed like one resident who was talking was saying that the language about qualifications was potentially going to be a sticking point. So I think the language was something like there was like an education requirement, an experience requirement, or so it was like 5 years experience in a kindred role and an assistant town manager role or something, and a master's in public administration, or education and experience commensurate with that, or something like that, or relatively similar to it. I think the resident was saying, well, what does that "or" mean? That could be
Right,
just
right.
the town council could
Right.
just appoint their buddy,
Yeah.
and say that they have commensurate experience in education, even though it's not. So the question of like, if you're going to go this route, how tightly you write the qualifications piece, like what exactly does the person have to have?
Yeah. I think if we were to write qualifications for an elected town administrator, we might get into a little bit of trouble. We might pigeonhole ourselves, right? Because if that person needs to be a resident in North Smithfield, needs to have specific education, needs to have specific experience, we're really limiting the pool. And of that pool, how many of them are actually going to be interested in the town administrator role?
Well, and I think the problem with that comes in with it being an elected versus an appointed position.
Right,
Because if
right.
you hire someone, it
They don't
didn't
have to live
need
in
to
the
be a
town.
town.
Right,
a
exactly.
town resident. So that's where the issue came in.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
But it does seem like just a resident of a town seems too,
Yeah.
of the town seems little too.
Right.
Because, I mean, we could elect, at the next administrator election, we could, there could be a senior at the high school that's
Yeah.
18 years old, and let's.
Be the
let's-
only one
let's be a-
running.
Let's
Popularity
pull a
contest,
senior
yeah.
prank,
Oh, yeah.
senior prank, and let's get me on the ballot.
Don't,
and
don't give them ideas. They could be watching.
Great.
So like, we could end up in that situation where it's
Yeah.
like, the whole town just decides to,
Or it's the only person running.
right.
Right.
And that, then like, oh, that's the only person running? Okay, it could be a situation like that. So
Yeah.
definitely defining a little bit better qualifications that are obtainable within our demographics that we have in town as well. Because, there's certainly a large amount of opportunities that some individuals may have and other individuals may not have, but we still want to make sure that we're leveling the playing field a little bit, so, everybody has the ability to, but we just want to make sure you get, got a good head on your shoulders, essentially. Because as soon as we say, if, they need a master's degree in whatever field we decide, then does that mean we've only limited it to 4 people in town and they don't want to have any interest in running,
Right.
Right.
There was another part where it references prepare a budget annually. I want to put in the date for that, as we've already discussed, under section 6, subsection 7. And again, a lot of modernization of language for the powers and duties there.
How do we get the data for the questions and approve, rejection votes?
I believe everything is on the Secretary of State
Okay.
website. It might be just as easy to ask the town clerk to see if they can pull that data pretty quickly. But I know if it's not readily available, we can certainly go on the Secretary of State page, because I've gone to it for when I went back for something. I can't remember what it was. But I did find historical voter data on that.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any further comments? And again, if there's something that pops into your head, I'm always happy to revisit. We can keep the sections that we talk about as continued agenda items and always reference back to them if, because I don't want to close off any conversation for what we're doing right now.
When is our next meeting? Just,
So our next meeting, I believe we had decided,
It's probably in my meeting then.
I know I have it somewhere, if you just give me 1 second. We had decided towards the end of August.
okay, it's August 27th. I just found it.
Yeah, Wednesday, August 27th, yeah,
Okay.
that's what I have in my notes.
So the question 5-13, amendment to the North Smithfield Charter. It was 66.5% reject, 33.5% for.
For which again?
The
Town manager.
town manager.
I think you also have to look at though.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was the initial one, and then the second one was, and then, well, we can look at this later, but it was the 4-year term. No, town administrator, sorry.
Yep, the town
We'll look at it
administrator
later.
got adjusted to a 4-year term.
Yep,
With 2 consecutive terms being the term limit.
I think you also have to consider, like, at the time of that vote, what other municipalities in the surrounding area had a town manager versus a town administrator? Like, now that we're
Correct.
seeing more towns with
Yeah.
town managers
yeah,
and, their potential success, that might also inform, constituents' votes.
absolutely.
Because it's more current.
Mhm.
Okay. So unless we have any further discussion for this evening, obviously, Mr. Gibbs isn't here for any administration recommendations, so I'll check in with him for potentially the next meeting. I know he had said at our first meeting he was working on a document. We can continue discussions on sections 1 through 5, but then probably we'll start to dive into sections 6 through 10. And then get an understanding of what we can start to identify as priorities on those. So that will be for our next meeting in August. As we said, August 27th. I think we landed on that one. And then the next item for discussion, consideration, and action, the proposed timeline. I know our resolution says that we had to get comments and recommendations to the town council by June 30th of 2025. Clearly that happened. We were successful in checking that box. But given the amount of information that we need to really digest and the fact that we didn't really get any specific section that we needed to identify for review by the council, that leaves me to believe that, and we would have had to have a special election anyways.
Right.
That gave me this draft timeline that I sent out to you folks. working back from the 2026 general election, that we would have these dates laid out, that, you know, in August of this year, we'd continue discussions of chapters 1 through 5. I can probably adjust these a little bit. So basically, for the remainder of the year, August, September, October, November, we discuss the 18 articles that are in here. Then come December, we start to create a suggested changes report. We can certainly look to prioritize, you know, make sure we're prioritizing what we think are the most important pieces. Then come January, we distribute and present that draft to the town council. In February, we solicit additional public feedback, you know, have a public forum, what have you, just for people to come and comment on things. Once we get that feedback, we incorporate the town council, administration, and public feedback into a final report in March. And then April of next year, we would present our proposed final changes to the town council. And at that point, we could have, I put June 1st as council approval for referendum questions, just because June 30th is the last date that we would have to get things to the Secretary of State for incorporation onto the ballot. That could happen sooner, or, you know, sooner than June 1st, but that's kind of our drop dead of when they, because it might be that they have the referendum questions on the June 1st meeting, then continue a public hearing to their second meeting in June, and then by that time at their second meeting, because there'll be budget fatigue, you know, changing pace to budget, then we'll have everything ready to send to the Secretary of State. And then between that point and October, end of October, we would have just voter education forums to make sure that what we've proposed to date, what council has approved to be put on the ballot, that people get a really good understanding of why we're recommending these changes and what the benefit of those changes would be.
I would recommend, rather than a June 1st, 2026 for council approval, make it the second meeting in May.
Okay.
I just wouldn't want it to get deprioritized because of budget, because we start having those conversations
Right.
at the beginning of June. So if we give ourselves that deadline of the last meeting of May, then there's no way around it.
Perfect. So one of the things that, if everyone's in agreement with this timeline, as we just amended, then this could be one of the recommendations to town council that says that I can present, or Rebecca, you can present to the town council and say, okay, clearly we missed the June 30th. We didn't, you know, have our formation until June 18th. So we want to make sure that we're giving ourselves the appropriate time and the respectable amount of time to really give you appropriate recommendations to move forward. So I can make a motion that we recommend this timeline to the town council for adoption into our resolution. I will make that as a motion, so then I just need a second. So we have a motion and a second, and I won't bother with roll call vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, perfect. So then I will send this along to the town council.
One quick question. Do you anticipate us soliciting feedback from any of the town boards and commissions before we produce our suggested changes, or?
We could certainly do that too, because I know there's a whole, the whole town planner section just got approved at the 2018 election. So there, we can certainly involve, and we actually followed the process in the town charter to hire our current town planner, Mark. We went through that process and it worked out pretty well. So we can certainly talk to the boards and how those processes have gone through too, because obviously we can talk to the budget committee about, and the finance department about their section. more than, I'm sure that's where Scott's going to be coming back with us with some recommendations from his administration as well, based on, we have DPW, planning, finance, town clerk. So there's a lot of departments that we can certainly be interfacing with. And I'm more than happy to invite them to these meetings, so then that way we can have the public discussion with them.
Yeah, I think it was valuable just to hear tonight, like budget committee experience and how I mean, to.
I was just on one piece of it too,
Yeah.
as Jeff said.
Okay. Any further other recommendations to town council at this point? Again, I'm gonna keep that as an agenda item for rolling. So if we do come up against something, we can make that recommendation so that they can direct us one way or another, or if they need to make a decision. Do we need to, this is more probably for a question for you, do we need to make any motions for recommendations to move forward with general code? Or is that already in process?
So I'm still waiting on response from the town clerk's office on cost for
Okay.
general code. I have not heard back. I'll follow up with Joanne on that.
All right.
Do we have a budget for the charter review committee? So that might, and not to get off the topic, but it might factor into our timeline. If we want to be able to provide education outside of whatever the state pamphlets are, then we'll want to consider requesting budget for 2020.
2026?
Well,
Well,
It's already done.
26, 27.
yeah, so
It
June,
would be the next budget.
yeah, so the
Oh,
next
okay.
budget.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
To educate the public
So the way
before
the
the vote,
fiscal year
obviously.
runs.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that will give us time, right? Like, once it's approved
In June.
in May,
Yep.
right?
Yeah,
We
May. We can go
we
to,
can then go to the town council budget,
I know
right?
somebody on the budget committee.
And then, we could have that budget for voter education.
Okay. Then the last item on the agenda is adjournment. I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.